because you know I'm a big fan of the show. So, I'm Spark. Oh, sorry. Oh, God, everyone. Oh, hello. Matt just said, you're hot. I was like, I'm hot? Really? No. Can I be on your show? No. Hi, I'm Paige Albiniak. I'm a contributing editor with Broadcasting and Cable, and it is as you just heard me say, it's my great honor to be talking to Matt Weiner today, who is the executive producer of the very fabulous Mad Men. I've talked to Matt a few times in my travels as a journalist, and actually early on in the show.
Yeah.
But, so season 5 is coming.
Yes.
What's going to happen?
March 25th.
March 25th, so.
And it's on at 9 instead of 10, just for the premiere, because it's a 2-hour premiere.
Oh,
it's
2-hour premiere.
Yeah, and it's not 2 episodes crammed together, it's 1 episode, so.
Oh, excellent.
Giant episode.
Not to plug Netflix more than they've already been plugged at this conference, but you can, review your Mad Men lore.
You can catch up.
Yes. So, so now let's spend the next half hour talking about John Hamm. No.
Sure. I'd love to.
I love him. Okay. So you were saying last night at the really lovely Brandon Tartikoff Legacy Awards that you were bad in school and that TV was sort of your guilty pleasure if you could access it.
It still is a thing where I get excited when I have some time to watch TV, and it still feels like a little bit illicit to watch it.
If you get to watch it, what do you watch?
I get to watch it fairly, during the season I don't get to watch that much, and I don't get to catch up, and I try and catch things, new things especially, but as a viewer, I have 4 boys, so I don't really have control over what I watch like most people.
Let's have SpongeBob.
No, we're beyond that. I have an 8-year-old, but he has no control at all anymore. So I still watch The Simpsons regularly. I watch It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. I watch 30 Rock, which I love. I watch Breaking Bad when it's on, usually at the end of our season when I'm free. I usually watch it all at once.
And then you say, "Fie on you for taking our best actor, Emmy."
Oh, no.
No, that's just me.
No, I mean, he's great in it. But I love the show. It's a very entertaining show, especially, since The Sopranos gone, that sort of is gone. That sort of satisfies my,
need to watch a bad person.
Random violence. Quoted. I still watch some version of Law and Order. You can't put it in the TiVo because it will burn it out.
Yeah.
You can't put the words law and anything in there, or in the TiVo just has a seizure. Well,
I wanted to ask you, well, first of all, you said, I'm bad in school, and then now you're a writer. And to me, to be bad in school and then to be a writer seems like the 2 worst combinations.
I was not a good student. It wasn't that I didn't get an education, and it wasn't that I didn't learn anything. I just was I didn't really even understand what a syllabus was until like my last year of college. I kept saying to people, like, how'd you know that was due? And they're like, they told you the first day of school. It's like, in fact, after I went to graduate school, I got married right as graduate school was ending, and I had a premiere of my student film, and I got a lot of attention, and then nothing happened. And so for turned out to be almost 5 years, I was home writing, doing work occasionally here and there before I got a job. I made an independent movie finally, which really changed my life.
What was the independent movie?
It's called What Do You Do All Day? And it's a $12,000 movie, but I was a different person afterwards because I had been so frustrated trying to break in and trying to get people to read my stuff, and I guess just decided at that time, that I would just make a movie. And got my friends together, got people. And once you say you're going to do that, people will help you. But during that time where I was not working, I read almost everything I was supposed to read in college, which really helped. And it's just a matter of like understanding assignments, and I can't explain it. It's like being a terrible student, and in terms of writing, I always was writing. I wrote a lot of poetry in high school. And I ran the literary magazine, and I, on the surface, was very accomplished. It's part of how I got into college. I ran clubs and, did the political union and did a lot of speaking, whatever, speech and debate and drama. I did a lot of theater. I went to an all-boys school, and the only way to sort of have any contact with girls was to go and do theater at the girls' school. So I did a lot of theater. It wasn't the only reason, but I liked that. And so that sort of became part of my imagination as a writer. But I wanted to be a writer since I was a very little boy. And I knew that there were a lot of writers that I admired who had the same problems that I did with their education. And it wasn't defiance. It was literally cluelessness. Cluelessness and, I can say quite frankly, laziness.
Which is not the case now.
I still feel lazy, but I do work all the time. But it's weird to me sometimes when I'm like, I have a script due, and I don't really procrastinate because I can't, because you'll get killed. I mean, you procrastinate on some level, but it's nothing. I mean, I'm never doing it the night before for what I literally am maybe rewriting it the night before that day, but it has to get done. It has to get done. But I remember, just the sensation of like having a script due and having no time to do it, and saying like, I can do a little bit every day, or I can do the whole thing at once. And realizing that doing a little bit every day, which good students all know that, right? I didn't know that. It's just stuff like that.
So
when you are working at home with no income and no deadlines, you become less lazy. You really do. You have no choice when you have to be completely self-motivated. Mm-hmm. And I had a writers group of which Maria Jacques Maton, her husband, is now her writing partner. He wasn't a writer at the time, or he might have been, but he wasn't making a living on it. She is an executive producer on the show. We were in a writers group together 20 years ago, and that was my artificial deadline. And so you would have to turn in pages, and at least you'd go and commiserate and complain and do all the things that you need to do.
So when and I might be wrong about this, but I know that one of your early shows was Becker, correct? I don't think
it wasn't my early show. It was actually the show I did right before I got on The Sopranos. I went to Andy Richter after that, but I wrote the pilot while I was at Becker. It was my fifth or sixth job.
So what I wanted to ask you is, and the shows that you mentioned were a lot of comedies, and
it was
everyone
only
always
comedies.
says you're funny. And then you did Becker, and you did Andy Richter, and then you did The Sopranos, and then you did Mad Men. I mean, why and how did you make the leap from comedy to very dramatic drama?
I did not know that these things were ghettoized in that way. I didn't know sitcom was even written that way. My friend Daisy, who I went to college with, made this movie Party Girl, and she did. Then they did a TV show of it, and I came in and helped on the pilot, just sitting in a room pitching jokes. I didn't know the job existed, and they gave me a job, and then I had to write a spec. And then I had to get my next job. Mike Saltzman hired me onto The Naked Truth. And then that was my job. I was a sitcom writer. And I finally kept working job after job and doing pilots and coming in and working for free places and so forth. And a yearly job, literally. You get on a show for a year and then it would get canceled. Maybe you get 13, maybe you get 6, 8, whatever. Back then it was 13 or not, nothing. They might cancel it in the middle of it, but you'd have a real order. And I didn't know that was anything other than what it was. And you were required to be funny, tell jokes, get jokes in it, write funny scripts, think of funny stories. And that was sort of it was hard. It was very competitive, It was fun because you're in the room with all these other funny people. But writing the pilot of Mad Men, I didn't really think of it as genre, one thing or another. I knew it was a drama only because it was an hour. And I think the show was pretty funny. And when I got to Sopranos, it was based on the Mad Men pilot. That's how David Chase hired me, he read the pilot. And he is still one of the funniest people I've ever met in my life, and that show was definitely run with a sense of humor.
Well, Sopranos had subversive, subtle humor, so...
Yeah, I mean, that's what I feel like Mad Men is, too, to some degree. It's like, believe me, there is more humor in that in the show than you think there is. If you took it out, it would be the bleakest, saddest thing in the entire world. Yeah. And there are also a lot of things that are on the tragic side that I find very funny. So it's hard to explain, what that tone is. But there's a lot of irony is humor. There's a lot of irony in the show.
Think of the lawnmower episode. I don't know
yes,
if you guys
that's
saw
funny.
The lawnmower. That was hilarious in a weird way.
Right, it is funny.
So you're on Becker, and then how are you inspired to write the script for Mad Men?
It's basically, it's going to sound negative, but I was very frustrated when I was on Becker. I loved Ted. and I love the cast, but I really did not enjoy working there. I kind of felt like the show was number 9, which was a big deal.
Yeah.
You know, we were on after Raymond, and it was a very successful show, but I was really frustrated with my experience as a writer, both with the communal aspect of it, with I felt an inability to express anything that really mattered to me, with hearing about a lot of rules that weren't allowed to be broken. You know, just stories you couldn't tell, stories you couldn't continue, and that was just on Becker. And so your fantasy is sort of have your own show, but it wasn't to have my own show so that I'd get to go and sit on a panel or anything like that. I didn't know any of this would.
You did not fantasize about being on this panel?
Oh, in my childhood.
Oh.
In my childhood, for sure. And certainly when the show hit, I hoped that people would, want to talk about it. But honestly, there is a part of the motivation that I find with people who are younger than me right now is that they are more interested in being famous than they are in actually, they want to have their own show to be famous and to be in control. And for me, it was literally about how frustrating it was to express myself. And that I thought that a lot of the entertainment that I was looking at was inferior to something that could have come out if people had been allowed to do what they wanted to do. So I just figured, I pitched it to a couple people. They're like, that's interesting, you'll never pull that off, or I don't like that. Finally, I was like, you know what, I'm just going to write it. And whether it gets to be a show or not, I had been given some advice, actually, by Tom Palmer, who was sort of my mentor. He was the co-EP on Naked Truth, and then had his own show with Diane English that I worked on, which was a great experience, called Living in Captivity. It was like 3 and out, but it was a great experience creatively. And there's a couple people who worked on that show with me who work on Mad Men. And he said, if you can write your way out of anything. And I felt that I was in the doldrums and that I was unexpressed and I was still angry and I didn't understand why I was so frustrated. And so I just started researching it probably about 3 years before that. At night, I would work this job, this 24-hour-a-day job, and research this thing at night. And then finally, in between seasons, I was like, you know what, I'm just going to do it. And I wrote the pilot, and I wrapped it in a package when I was done, and sent it to my agents, and nobody read it. And so it still required, a lot of pushing. 2 years of pushing after that.
So, and then when I talked to you for the profiles that we did before this, you talked about how there was a generational story because you were in the world of the boomers and they all looked back on the 60s with such nostalgia, and you sort of thought rose-colored glasses, I think, was how
I feel like that was, and by the way, a lot of this analysis of it is afterwards. You ask anybody how they came up with an idea, they don't know. I mean, I definitely admire the entertainment from this period and had seen certain movies like Patterns, which was a TV movie written by Rod Serling that they then made into a feature. I'd seen the feature version of that. My parents were married in 1959, so that culture is a big part of my life growing up. They were obsessed with the Blacklist. They're like into being educated, really, like reading about writers, quite honestly, but like Catch-22, and there was a lot of stuff from the 50s that late 50s that I was interested in. And also, I told you, growing up in the 80s in Los Angeles, there was it's hard to explain what the nostalgia boom was like, but there was, everything had a cast of 50s on it. Not just restaurants and movies and, part of it's hard to explain, because it's sort of gone, but the 2 biggest TV shows when I was growing up were MASH and Happy Days, and they're both set in the late 50s.
I get this vision of, like, the dark side of Dick Van Dyke is Mad Men.
Yeah, it's
Dick Van Dyke was a drunk, and he...
Well, he did fall over that ottoman every day.
True.
He fell down.
So then, can you talk about...
Well, I was just going to say along those... No, I can talk about whatever you want, but I was just going to say along those lines, the dark side of it is part of it, because I felt that there was this complete idealization of that period. And growing up in the 80s in this conservative, Ronald Reagan America, I was sort of like, these people had all become very conservative and then kept talking about their youth, about how they had invented sex and we had missed their, and there I was going to college. Literally, my freshman year was the beginning of the AIDS scare. And not that it wasn't hard enough for a freshman to meet a woman anyway. Really, I was like, well, this is not the sexual revolution. going on. This is the anti-sexual revolution when they give you a dental dam in your freshman kit.
In orientation.
I'm not kidding. I was like, wow, that's a little darker than I thought it was going to be.
Dark.
Coming from an all-boys school, I was like, wow. There's
You're like, what's this?
I was like, yeah. So.
Okay, so I was going to ask you, did the inspiration start with Don Draper? Was the idea of this man who didn't have an identity or was hiding his identity, and then
Well,
everything
I
went
had been
on from
working on a feature before I actually pulled the trigger on the pilot, and it wasn't until AMC was going to buy the pilot that I looked through my notes and realized I had been working on this thing for much longer than just the time that I wrote the pilot. That I had this 85-page feature where I was trying to write about the generation that came out of the Great Depression and how they ran the country, and how these incredibly inauspicious backgrounds, with rural poverty, that they had all hidden their childhoods and changed their identities, and basically were running the country. And I'm talking about people like, it changed your identity in a very loose way, but this American sort of iconic travel, journey of like Sam Walton and Lee Iacocca. These are the biographies I read, and Rockefeller earlier than that. He's not part of that generation, but just sort of looking at it and saying like, oh, these people, no one writes about their childhood because they're so ashamed of it, but this is who they were. So I was working on this story called The Horseshoe, and I worked very hard on researching it, and this man who basically, in a GARP-like way, had completely contrived his story and succeeded, and was then, at that point, very successful in looking back on his life. I love this movie, Little Big Man, was another thing that where someone's looking back and telling their whole story of their life, and all the details they're telling you are lies, but in the movie, you're getting to see the truth. So anyway, I had abandoned that, and when I went back and looked at it, I was like, oh, that's who Don Draper is. But I always identified with this character, and I don't know if it's from Gatsby or...
We talked about Gatsby.
Yeah, we talked about Gatsby, which is not a horrible thing to say that you're influenced or stole from.
Yeah.
At this point, it's like the Bible, right? So it's considered to be pretty good and fair game, but... although if Fitzgerald was here, he was like, hey, that was my story, what are you doing? But I feel like that I started with Don because I wanted to tell a story about, and then, by the way, the more research I did about advertising and New York at that period, or any period to tell you the truth, the more I realized that New York is a place where people could go and completely transform themselves. When you are, unlike any city in the world, when you go to New York, within 3 or 4 months, you are a New Yorker. You are accepted as a New Yorker. People are from all over the country, all over the world. The people that I come in contact most with most who were there are the women, mostly because they live longer and they live cleaner, are the women who flocked to New York in the late 50s to have a career. There were 3 women needed to service every man in an office in terms of typing, clerical, phones, all these other things. There's no computers. So, and they're being paid, the 3 of them together, the salary of one man. And they were in the city. So that's why you hear all these different accents. That's why you see people from West Virginia, mining towns coming and becoming executives. It was possible. And that was where I started with Don. And then the idea that my own interest in the whole 60s itself was like that Don is already a dinosaur. When the show starts, Don is already from a different era, and what is going to happen as the culture changes was sort of where I originated the story.
So now we're heading into season 5, and would you say that where you're at with the show now is sort of where you thought you would be at, or has the show and the whole story gone places you never expected? And then also talk about the women, because I think that was something that surprised you a little.
Yeah, it did surprise me. Well, I mean, first of all, so once you get into having to tell more than one episode of the story, you better put on your thinking cap.
Yeah.
And so the first thing is that I had this pilot, which is very much what you saw. What I wrote is what I shot. That was one of the great things about working at AMC. And one of the great things, if people are going to ask for advice, when you go and pitch something and you involve other people in your idea, you are basically admitting that you don't know what you're doing. And you think that you're going to be accommodating their ideas, but they, in fact, want you to have your own ideas. And it becomes this free-for-all. Everybody weighed in on what they wanted in the pilot, And there were things that I added, little elements that I added to it based on notes. It's not like I didn't have any notes, and it's not like I don't want any notes. But presenting it fully formed, having thought it all out, was a great way. It was much better than a pitch. I was like, this is what it actually is. We still have to execute it, which was up for debate. But the women, when I finished the pilot, I probably would have done something that was much more soapy than it is, and much more of a sort of office pot boiler, like Executive Suite or like Patterns, where it would have been different.
And so why didn't
I got to have a little bit of an education in between when I wrote the pilot and the second episode. There were 4 years, and I was on The Sopranos.
Yeah.
And being on The Sopranos told me that I had all of these sort of random, interesting ideas that were going through my head could actually be put into a show and were interesting to other people, and that I could make a show about something more than plot. I have a plot. I dole it out in small pieces. I think a lot happens every episode, and there's always, what I promised the network is that there would be a holy shit moment in every episode, so that there would be a sense of plot, there would be tension, and that's what we called it. Where's the holy shit? That was the notes I used to get. I'm like, wait, read the end. And then I got to think about things like identity. I went back and looked at this movie and said, oh, that's who this guy is. This is the mystery, and I'm going to drag this mystery out over 13 episodes. And in fact, the first season, I don't know how well people do or don't know it, but I had written episodes, what came out as episodes 1 through 6, and broken them, and had like 2 or 3 little interactions about Don's identity. Had a guy calling him the wrong name on the train, had all these things, and I went back on a weekend because I realized that I was keeping Don's identity not just a secret from the office, but from the audience. And I went back and wrote this episode with his brother, where you found out really who he was and where he was from, and that he was hiding this name and hiding all of it. And inserted that. We shot it out of order and put it in between episodes 4 and 6, what was then 4 and 5. And just to keep the story alive and to realize that. So none of that would have been on my mind about how to sustain it, about how to do anything more than like Peggy's going to use Pete to get ahead, and Pete's going to be trying to get Don, and that would have been exhausted immediately. And that's what happens when you become tied to that sort of plot. There are people who do it amazingly. I'm not trying to pretend like it's not something I was capable of doing. And I would have ended up, Don would have been an astronaut by the end of season 2. He really would have been. It's like, well, the space program is calling, Don. I just would have run out of story. And then the other thing is I got to talk about the things that were interesting to me in my life, which is my constant, sort of, I talk a lot, but I listen a lot. And now with the show, people tell me a lot of things, but I am a conduit, I think, for people's dissatisfaction. But also, the beauty of the show is I get to tell it with what their aspirations are. And so I'm always sort of feeling those things. And the women in particular who are, I told you about, reading I was going to say The Second Sex, but The Feminine Mystique and Sex and the Single Girl within a week of each other, and realizing this dynamic. I mean, all you have to do is go to the parking lot at my kid's school. This dynamic between women who work and women who don't work. How you cannot have it all. What the guilt of trying to be a mother and to have a job, and also just seeing those two things as a path, and knowing that Joan right away was this incredibly ambitious, talented, sexually confident person, powerful person, and in the end she was really only there to get a husband, but she was conflicted by that. So that story right away. And Peggy, who wants it all and doesn't see herself as being limited as a woman, doesn't see herself as a woman particularly in any way at all, and how hard it is for her to realize that there are limitations. And also they're not symbols, you know what I mean? She has a personality. She's super judgmental, and she's kind of a stick in the mud, and you know what I mean? And she's a perfectionist, and all of these qualities of the human beings as they come out just became a great sort of counterpoint to the butt pinching and bra snapping, world of the guys, who are frequently being punished, and also not a moral universe. Not a moral universe. Right away, as soon as the show came out and all of the gender politics came out, they were like, "Aren't you glad it's different?" And I'm like, "Well, you're a woman reporter asking me that. You have not. I went to an all-boys school, and I am frequently alone with men, and I don't want to be a traitor or anything like that. But I don't think anything's changed. It's just been legislated against, which is good for the workplace, and it's gone underground. Some of it is biological."
So tell the story about Christina's manager.
Oh, it's just that's more about how, I think part of my job with the success of the show, whatever happens, is to help people know that taking a risk on something you believe in that's my job, is to help people stick it out, because that's how things happen. There's no one who has what you want who has not been told no a million times and been discouraged in sometimes really, really dramatic ways. One of which was working on AMC, that had never had a TV show, that didn't have a publicity machine, that did not have a brand, that did not have a profile outside of the channel, that was really considered to be the bargain basement bottom of basic cable, which was the bottom of the bottom. Was not a place for people to go and send their clients. So when I hired Christina Hendricks, who plays Joan, to be on the show, her manager said, "Do you really want to do this? You're really going to take yourself out of the pilot hunt, the network pilot hunt? John Wells is interested in you." She'd worked for him a few times. And she said, "No, I really want to do this show. I'd rather fail at this show than go and succeed on something else right now, and maybe it'll be," and they fired her.
So the manager fired her for doing Mad Men.
That's a long story, and I'm trying not to slam them, but you know what I mean? It's sort of like, I got so much discouragement from my fellow writers.
Right.
Just saying like, wow, what a waste of an opportunity. And no one's ever going to see that show. And I'm like,
Awful
nobody else
surprise.
wanted to make it. Nobody else wanted to make it.
But even HBO didn't want to make it.
HBO didn't want to make it hundreds of times.
Why was that they didn't want to make it?
Look,
seems so
look,
HBO.
more at this conference than anywhere else can I say, I do not want the job of programming. I do not want to have to pick what works and what doesn't work. If you find someone who is as excited about what they do as I am and has the goods in any way, shape, or form, jump on it. But people can fake enthusiasm too. And there are lots of people who are great salespeople who can't execute. They were not interested in it because they had an agenda that was related to, quite honestly, more proven people. David Chase went there. He'd been working for 30 years. He had started on Kolchak, The Night Stalker. He'd won an Emmy for a movie of the week when they used to, those were huge. He was on Rockford Files. He ran Northern Exposure. He did I'll Fly Away. I mean, that's the people they were taking a chance on. David Milch, was a legend already when he got there. And Alan Ball had just won an Oscar when he did 6 Feet Under. They're talking about a different universe. So they had really no interest in paying attention to me or reading what I did.
Have they ever said to you that they wish they took it?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Well, I mean,
good.
you know what? I don't know if it's a direct cause, but almost everybody who was there during that period who passed on the show was fired. So it might have just been a changing of the guard, but.
So we're coming to the end.
I know.
I wanted to ask.
I didn't wish that on them either. I'll just tell you something. I think the show would have been different if it had not been at AMC. I think that
So in the end, it was better. I mean, it was. A better choice.
Well, whatever happens is always better. I'm that kind of person.
Yeah.
Look at where I am. I cannot complain about how it would have gone. What if I'd gone to HBO? What would have been different? I don't know. I just know that the show has an underdog feel to it. It is peculiar, and we never did anything other than to make a show that we wanted to see. When I say we, I'm including Lionsgate and AMC. That was everybody's focus group. Do we like the show? Do we understand it? Every time there'd be notes of like, people won't get that, I would say like, do you get it? And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, well, I know you're my audience.
So I know you don't like to give anything away, but
I'm not going to give anything away. Don't waste that.
Are there any happy endings for anyone on Mad Men?
I think there's tons of happy endings on the show. It's just, things don't. People are hard to satisfy. And even when things go well, they get bored. You know? Don and Betty had a baby, basically, to save their marriage. And the baby came into the world and it didn't change anything, you know? Was it not a happy event to have a baby? Yeah, Betty was thrilled. She got to name him after her dad. I mean, I don't know. I mean, the show is a drama. It is cathartic, and there is a tradition to what I'm doing that is biological, I believe, also, which is to provide a kind of it's catharsis, to provide the working out of the story, tragic or otherwise, and to let people feel those feelings in a distanced way. And I've heard stories of couples who insist on watching the show together, and couples who insist on not watching the show together. And I love the fact that people get involved in it and that the characters feel real to them. And all I can say is that they are based on real people. They behave the way real people do. I don't want anyone to ever watch the show and go, what? No one would ever do that. And there's a certain amount of emotional honesty to it, which is unpleasant to look at, but I think that people, whether they can verbalize it or not, I'm offering something that you can't get anywhere else. And that's the show business part of it. I really want them to be entertained by it. And what is entertaining? Sometimes it's entertaining to watch a boxing match. Sometimes it's entertaining to watch Medea, you know, watch somebody eat their kids. I don't know what to tell you.
On that note, we're going to wrap up. Matt, it was so
no, it's such a pleasure.
talking to
Absolutely.
you. Thanks, you guys. And
we don't have any time. You want to do any questions?